for both the customer and FCS, are do you feel, because I highlight them not knowing anything about contracts, do you feel that these are substantive enough to measure on every level: operations, the product timeline or product success, and strategic? And I can see here where if we're not if somehow we're not meeting expectations, there's some efficiency things, because what I'm going to think is if we can't get a bid out on time, we may lose the window of opportunity to get the best pricing, or something to the effect. And so there are some efficiencies, what I would imagine. Again, quite naive to these things.
Yeah, and you miss your par window. You miss your. There's a lot of things that
Right.
the trickle down effect is big.
Right. Right. And again, if it takes, if we say it's going to take 15 days, and it'll take 15 days or whatever it is, again, then you would know you need to get this in a little bit earlier to meet that window, if you will. But I did, let's see here, put some notes in these. So let's see here. Jason, do you feel like, are we tracking or am I tracking the right process perhaps to move forward, or am I?
So mapping to, the strategic objective that we had was pretty open for this one, right? Was to just make sure that we are meeting in accordance with the expected timeline, right? And with that being said, was that we need to establish what that timeline was. Back to Tom's point to the last meeting we had, was we in order to understand what the timeline is going to be, we need to use historical context and the historical data, and in order to have that, that's what we're going to use to hopefully build that benchmark. So once we have what that benchmark is, based off of how long it takes for whatever components we have, whatever those phases are, that's what we'll use to say, oh, it's from intake to to the various phase gates, if you will. That's what that's going to. I think that's what that's going to be. So I think because we left it kind of open, it does lend itself to allow us to measure from those various points and put those the criteria on 15 days from this point, 3 months from point B to point C, and from point C to point D, and to evaluate the independent phases as well as the long-term phase based on the type of project, the dollar amount of the project, and that's kind of back to the I would say the measures that we're going to talk about next, you know what I mean? So yeah, I think that where we're at, it lends itself to the fact of because the strategic objective was pretty much open, and the strategic objective was really focused on meeting a time objective. It wasn't it didn't reference anything that was financially based per se. It wasn't quality based, even though the first one at the top was, to me, when we talk about audit, that more or less references, in my mind, it kind of leads itself to quality. So the post review of how well did we do? Did we follow the rules? Even though we were trying to, if we're trying to move at a certain speed, did we do it? You could talk about efficiency, but did we do it with quality? That one kind of speaks to me, like, how well did we do at this pace? So did we keep the right quality at, moving at X? And did we multiply, if we multiply that and move at X times whatever, did we still keep that quality threshold? So to me, that kind of balances it out and says, okay, how are we trending if we're moving at X? If we, instead of 15 days, if we move at 10 days, how do we trend? So to me, that kind of balances that out.
Okay.
So
I think another important thing about developing metrics, which we all understand, is like you really don't know how you're performing until you actually start measuring this stuff, and then so you really can't set any benchmarks yet, like you said, until you actually start measuring it and then see what is possible even.
Right.
Yes.
Then another interesting thing is, you'll probably get like some, what's your average timeline, but then, how's it impacted by the cyclical nature of what they're getting? If you ask the contracts office, they'll say, well, I can get it through fast if I only have 1 or 2 contracts coming through the office, but I have 12 of them submitted today. It's going to take longer. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays into. That's one of those leading indicators we talked about a little bit is, the number of contracts flowing through there at a time.
And that's where we talk about like outside influences, right? What you have your Cornell influences, and then you have your outside influences. You can only control a little bit from your outside vendor. What's the volume of, how many projects does your outside vendor have? How much are they quoting? How much are they estimating? What can they get you to? There's so many other variables that some of that comes into play. You might be running ship shape on your stuff, but you can only control what you can control, and then you might be okay. I'm here and I'm waiting for my vendor. And
It's a good point though. But so you're waiting on the vendor. Who calls the vendor? Say if that's our big finding. These processes sit with the vendor for half the time that they're running. Should contracts be following up? Should the PM be following up? Should someone else be following up? Like, should we just let it sit? Maybe the vendor's email from eBuilder goes to their junk file. Their contract's sitting in there. This is what's happening. So, like, those are the things we need to ferret out. Like, there could be outside influences, but who can manage those outside influences best? And what should we be doing?
Well,
and
absolutely.
What we're Dave, what we are identifying as well as areas in which we need to develop the policy procedure. So the question is, all right, so why is this held up? Well, we just don't know who's accountable for this. So we're learning quite a bit, and I did tell I had a conversation with Kelly last night. I said, we're learning a lot about our culture, our processes, expectations, all of these things that you don't just throw some numbers in a tableau and we're done, because we're learning quite a bit. But how do we focus on the task at hand here? So I have some questions because I started to, I was looking at the contributing factors and wondering, well, what does that mean? How could we track that? How could we at some point change it? But what we're going to end up with right now is baselines, because we have to look at what we've been doing, and our benchmark will be at this point the baseline, I would imagine, because we don't know what to or where to try to improve. We don't want to start trying to improve something until we know where we're at. And and that's the only data that we actually have. So as far as process mapping, to kind of speak to Jason's concept or idea about phase gates. Now we have an end-to-end where it's submitted and then signed, right? So that's an end-to-end, but there are gates or phases within this. And one of them that really kind of stuck out, and it's not on this par processing time as much as it is minus time in PM hold step awaiting par. And is this where in eBuilder it goes through and everybody needs to approve it? Is that what we're talking about with the minus time in PM hold?
For the contracts stuff, actually the PM should submit those as soon as they have the contracts, but they don't have any money until the PAR is approved.
Got it. Yes.
So right now the process is get that thing going, get it to contracts, they set it all up, tee it up, ready to go. Then it sits in a part of the process called the PM hold step.
Mhm.
And basically they're waiting the money from the PAR. So when the PAR gets approved, then the PM pushes it forward.
Okay.
So it could be a couple of weeks just in that step because you're waiting for the PAR to get approved. So my thought is that that time duration should be backed out of the. If you're going to be assessing contracts, they shouldn't be. I mean, we should have both numbers, like with the PM step included and without the PM step.
And this could, so is this part of the process though, with an end to end? This is actually a gate, if you will, or a phase in the timing.
Yeah, in Ebola they're called steps. So
Okay.
it sits in that step. It's a clear step, and then it counts the history. It counts the days in each step.
Okay. So
In
we
the
have
system, the data should be there.
okay, yeah. So we have a benchmark, and we can look at the averages of that.
And
Because
not every contract will have that because not every contract is waiting PAR.
okay.
Some contracts PAR is already approved and you're doing the contract request, so it will be depending on the actual each item. I guess another point about both of these, just so I'm sure Jason knows already, but this is actually two processes. So there's the CRP process and then the CA process, and together they make up the total timeline. But so you need to add the time from
that's
the
kind of what I wanted to go through.
the start date of the CRP process to the end date of the CA process together. Because the CRP is like us telling contracts this is what we need, and there's stuff in there that we don't want the vendor to see. And then it automatically generates the CA process, and then that process goes to the vendor with just their stuff.
Okay.
Okay, so I need to get that process breakdown, and is that something that Donna just is isn't like familiar with? Okay,
Oh yeah,
so work with Donna on that one. And then the one factor that I was kind of curious about is did I hear correctly? There's a difference between SUNY contracts versus Cornell contracts because we have to go through a different process through SUNY funded projects versus Cornell projects. So,
I mean, there's the same process, but there's different steps. So, I mean,
different
in
steps
that process, like
right?
you'd find that same data in the same process, but it goes a different routing, and there's different steps on the route for state contracts. So there's a field should be identified that this is a state contract, and then you can pull those out, state contract data versus or Cornell University.
Right. And I think the
Data.
benchmark is a little bit different, right? Because if from what I was provided was that it takes longer for the state stuff to get approved and than it would be for Cornell's.
That sounds right to you, right?
So,
yes, very much so.
So
that
the
would be a different benchmark for the state
right.
contracts, yeah.
So that would be the qualifier was that, when we think about just the overall end to end, we need to think about what other things would influence that, other categories or other elements of the data that would say, okay, because it's this type of project, we need to be able to, filter that out and say, okay, these types are going to be benchmarked against this way, and this type of project is benchmarked against that way. So not only, even though we're talking about like PAR processing time, or like when we talk about dollar amounts, we also need to talk about any other qualifiers that may separate them and differentiate them differently.
Yeah, like actually, now that you mention that, it should be state versus non-state. Then we have this that hasn't even rolled out yet, really, but there's a design. I don't know, what are they calling it, Todd? IDIQ, not IDIQ, right? Like the pre-selected designers that they expect will go quicker, but
Yeah, I don't know if that's been finalized yet. Go on.
and but there are contracts where we have term agreements with vendors, blanket agreements. So like our testing contracts and our there's a few design ones, and those will be should be really quick, and they would bring like the average down of the regular contract if they weren't separated out.
In looking at contracts office workload, is there any value to looking at metrics or developing these metrics based on blocks of time? I would think to get prepared for the spring construction period, that January, I don't know, through April timeframe is very different than maybe the October to December. I'm not in contracts, so I don't know if that's true, but I've always heard that there are definitely like peaks and valleys.
Right. So
Yeah.
I added seasonal there because, excuse me, and this was something that we could see in the kind of the timeline, the historical timelines, or what we've experienced with was it PM? I think that the PM thing that Jason had shown on Monday.
Yep.
Way back in Monday. So that would actually be a leading metric. So we can look at that and we can understand, all right, so we can expect in April that it'll take 15 days, whereas in October it took 5, right? So
Right.
we can understand that if we look at the historical data and say, you know what, this could be a leading metric.
Right. You can see the seasonality with that. And
We
most
may even
definitely.
change behavior as to when people put forward their stuff.
Right?
Yep. Right. Can you shift? I mean, and we've talked about that before, you know,
Mhm.
can you shift that? Can you possibly, move something ahead by a month? Can you start a process a little earlier? Those kind of things.
Or in this instance, because it workload again, can we supplement
Mhm.
FTE or something like that during this time so that
Right.
it's pretty consistent across the board, that we can all expect it.
You could have seasonal rotationals, or even people that
Right.
they don't have a lot of work during this time, but contracts does. So, every year we pluck that person. They're trained.
Right.
Mhm.
Yep.
Reoccurring seasonal or reoccurring rotationals.
Right, with identified people.
Yep. Okay.
So, and just a few other questions, I think, to help, as we get down into looking at the data and looking at,
Excuse me.
right now, I think the only thing that we can, the historicals will be really predictive at this point, and then we can move forward. But let's see here, outside influences, we put that process mapping. So understanding what the steps are in eBuilder. I guess we can look back into that now. I was just wondering what that looks like, but we'll look at eBuilder first because that will be the data source. And then we talked about the current benchmark, what a customer can expect in the time to process. What does submitted on time? So the contributing factors, one of them is they are submitted on time, but is this something that we can measure? Or is this just something that we need to be cognizant of, that if you don't get it in at a certain time, then it may take a little bit longer?
I guess technically you could figure out how to measure it, but it would be really hard.
Okay.
There's a par schedule, the cycle, like things are due at certain dates to be able to meet the next meeting. So if you don't meet this schedule, then that causes issues for them. And I think usually they get it in, but somehow you may end up getting pushed to the next cycle. So something may sit for another extra, 30 days or 60 days or whatever, because they missed a cycle.
Okay.
And that would look long, but it's not because of them, it's because of when it came in.
And we need to be careful with that particular metric too, because I'm talking to Brenda, I understand that on the deadline dates, staff is working till like 9 o'clock at night to get things in because people get things in late.
Right. So, and I think this one, it sounds not subjective, but not necessarily measurable. But this would be something that we come back to and say, well, we've set the benchmark here based on historical data, but we're just not meeting that. And one of the things that you would say, at least, is, hey, we're working until 9 o'clock at night. Why? And then we look at these reasons.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want people working until 9 o'clock at night.
No, and not every month.
Right. So how can we? And that's the human factor. How can we mitigate doing that? So.
Well,
What's
in
the
Tom,
threshold of those projects, the ones where, like Tom, you're saying, what is it, CBG, the meeting, the approval meeting at the university level? What's the threshold of that project approval, dollar-wise?
2 million.
2 million.
and that information wouldn't be within eBuilder at that point in time, right? That's outside of.
For the schedule, you mean? Yeah, there's a calendar that's outside of eBuilder.
For submitting that's just basically organizing your stuff to submit the PAR, right? That's just all outside of any type of
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be
formal
Well, you do
workflow type data capture.
Doesn't the PIR happen first, Tom?
Oh yeah, PIRs.
So once the PIR happens, then you have a measurable time frame. You should be in the system, right?
Yeah, but we're just talking about just the PAR process here.
Right. So the PIR is in the
That's the first thing.
PM and the other
Right.
group.
I guess I was thinking you do the PIR comes in so many days to have a PM assigned.
Yeah.
Is there an expectation after the PM is assigned that so many days after that you have a PAR in the system going for signature?
There should be. That I think I don't know what exactly we put in the other one, but PIR we did have on the other team.
Mm-hmm.
Problem with that though, there's so many factors that could affect that not happening. Like it's not really a project yet. It's not fully cooked. It's like the estimate's wrong, the schedule's wrong. So then you're working out all those issues, which are not really,
Right, but you have a measure. We have an average of what is happening now.
That would be great to have that.
So if you are planning your project and hey, it's going to take 45 days for that to happen, then you need to back up your schedule 45 days.
You're saying from PIR to PAR.
Correct. I don't know, and I'm making up the numbers. Yes,
but that's what I mean. We're talking about from the time you have a PIR to the time of PAR.
PAR. Yeah, I think that's a metric. And to Bridget's point, once you have that, then you can look at, okay, so what's causing that if you're unhappy with that time frame?
Right. And that speaks to, obviously, FCS, we don't work in silos. Mm-hmm. So these processes, one, with the exception perhaps of custodial, could all be connected. And so the end could be in all of these. We'll do.
That's the ultimate metric. That's it all, everything all together in one line.
Right.
Don't set the bar that high.
But we'll look at it in segments. So
yeah, let's start there. Then we'll put it together at the end.
Yeah,
like once you start setting, the metrics and expectations, then you can start, like I said, analyzing what's going on and actually make adjustments in your process. You might have this cyclical nature with, projects in the spring or whatever. You probably see this every month where it comes up to the PAR deadline for that month or whatever, and you have a big glut of projects because everyone's trying to get them in, and maybe there's a way to shift some labor over in the contracts office to adjust for that each month to help with that. I don't know,
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't think the timing thing is going to be that big of a factor. I think it's just something we need to realize could be a factor.
Mhm.
My sense is
Yeah,
it's,
I
they
just
do
know
work
it-
till 9 o'clock to get them out. So like even if you send in late, they're getting it done. So it's not like I don't think a lot of projects are getting held over because they don't make the deadline. And
Oh
there's a lot
no,
of
that's why they're working till 9.
Yeah.
They're getting them out. They're
Yeah.
they're fixing the stuff.
Yeah.
They're doing stuff that they may
Yeah.
or may not like wouldn't be a normal expectation.
So can I ask, because there was another thing that could be a contributing factor, and I completely understand, the accuracy or missing data and anything like that. So do we track or note somewhere in eBuilder, um, this was sent back because we didn't have all of the information, so that when we go back and look, this took, 25
I don't
days.
know.
I mean, it's all in there. Every keystroke of history for what was changed is in the system.
But is there a button or is there something that says, hey, this got rejected on this day?
Well,
And, or returned, however you want to say it. Rejected is such an evil word, right?
rejection is an evil word. That sounds like a
Yeah.
song. I like that.
But this is when we sent it back, right? And
So here's the problem, though, right? They don't send it back, which is a good thing, because if they do send it back, it goes back to like the beginning of
Yeah.
our prep step, and everybody that signed it, the prep step has to sign it again. So Wendy holds it and then fixes everything. So she usually puts a comment in. So there'll be a comment
Right.
back to the PM saying fix this stuff, which is just based on how we set this thing up is the right way to do it, because it just saves like a tremendous amount of time.
so is there a metric that says if Wendy's net ID puts in a comment in this stage, we know we had a problem?
Yeah. Well,
I mean, is that a metric that you could because you can, it's a count, right?
yeah, there's a count there. You can count how many comments there are. For sure, that's a data availability. It gets harder the more nuanced you want to pull like somebody's net ID out or see what the comment is. I think what you could do is like, here's the data. We have 2,000 PARs. There's 30 of them that are up here in the super long range. What happened with these? And you start digging through the comments and you see, they went back and maybe those are outliers you don't count in the, main.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
The information's all there.
Because you don't want your outliers to.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not
You
part
don't
of
want
the
to.
story.
You don't want to negatively impact collaboration for correction.
Yeah, I mean they do a great
Correct.
job at it. They're really good at that. So
Mhm.
that all that information's in there. It's in there.
So, but maybe we can ask Donna if there's a reason code, if there's anything that's something like reason codes or something like that, that when things are sent to others, I don't know.
There's a comment basically, and it's like the comments come individually in the comments tab, and that's a data field you can pull out.
And
But
it tells you like who made the comment. That's what I was getting back to. If it's specific people in the contracts office that are making those comments in that step, then there was an issue. There was something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that suggestion about reason codes. I mean, otherwise you're just tracking this big blob of comments.
Yeah.
Right.
That might.
Filtering out text is just.
Yeah, exactly.
Always.
I just don't know if we have it. It's
No,
Yeah, I've
fall
seen
into
some
reason
the
code now. No.
Oh my
RFP
gosh.
process.
Yeah, I've seen some PARs with some pretty extensive comment sections.
You need some extensive reason code. You need a reason code sheet like this one.
Just check. Really lengthy.
Yeah.
Should have been an email.
Select all.
Tom, look how easy that'd be though. You just select a reason code and send it back. You don't have to even comment.
I love it.
Yeah, but we don't want.
Yeah.
I mean, to Tom's point, we're trying not to send them back.
It could be easy.
More acronyms.
Because ultimately, you need that bridge repaired, or you need that
The
lab
easy
renovated,
thing
or
is-
you need.
Yep.
It's not ready for submission. Period.
Right.
If it's
I
either
had to get
ready,
it on
it's not
schedule. I
ready.
had to meet the schedule, so I had to get it in.
Yeah.
Check.
And Wendy will fix it. She can fix anything.
She's the best. She's amazing. She'll
Right.
email me at 8:00 and ask me what I need.
We don't want her to do that at 9:00 though.
And you realize that she's moving to a different position, right?
Where's she going?
She's going to take Sherry's job.
What?
Yeah,
That's good. That's good, right?
that's good.
Still in
Yeah.
the contracts office. Great. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is Sherry retired?
Yes.
Real?
So that, geeking out on that, if we had this all in place, then a very seasoned contracts person moved and you have a new one, what's the impact of that, right?
Right.
And so, again, the conversation, I love the numbers. So whenever you make a change, then you could say, oh, cool, it didn't impact it. Or did we train her enough? Or
Mm-hmm.
did we put the right person in the position? And so that would be
Yeah, that's a lagging indicator, but yeah.
right. So Jason, I had one other, I'm sure I have several questions, but looking at the morning scribbles,
Mhm.
get away from, okay. Is there something that we can perhaps reference or put in the processing? How could we look at moving metrics from lagging to leading? Is there something that we can look at? Because not all of them we will be able to do, and it may be a bit of a stretch or a little further down the line before we can make some of these leading. But is there something that we can think about? Is this data available? Just as groups. And again, I don't know if leading or lagging is going to happen right away. This may be the next phase in this. But if just for my low brain, if you could help me with that, then I could start chewing on that too.
So some of the things that I was thinking of was like, if you know how, so like a lagging indicator is like, how have you been performing at the various levels of, um, when you, to me, like if we were to take line 3, where it's like, okay, we have projects at various dollar thresholds, right? And if you're saying I've got, 10 projects at a threshold of, between 250K to 2 million, and this is how I've performed on these projects. And if you have 10 projects like that, right? And or take your spread of, I got 10 projects here and I've got, 3 projects at between 2 million and 10 million or whatever that is. Based off the capital review, and you take your annual review and you say, okay, here's what the next year looks like, or here's what the next 2 years look like for capital review projects. That's the only thing I can think of like as a leading indicator of like, if you've got this many of approved projects and you foresee that it's going to be twice the amount of, like you have 20 250 to 2 million capital projects, and you expect to get them in this amount of time frame. To me, that's going to be a leading indicator of like, okay, guys, we either are going to be able to handle it or we're not going to be able to handle it. To me, that's the only thing that I can see that would be kind of like a leading indicator of like, here's what's possibly going to be coming.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of evaluate that against kind of like what your historical benchmark is going to be, and you're going to say, okay, here's what I can kind of see is like going to foreshadow what's going to be coming. And that to me is going to say, here's a leading indicator of, we've been able to handle 10 of these at this rate. Knowing that I'm going to get 20 of these coming along is going to be something that I need to plan for. Something like that is to me is possibly going to be a leading indicator, something that's like an outside influence. Kind of what you had mentioned before, which is, staffing. Staffing is kind of like somewhat an indicator.
Jason, I would thought like you mentioned like the one you just mentioned is maybe more like approved capital plan, but then a lot of times when those actually hit the books and start to get processed is another thing. Kind of related to staffing would be the sheer number of when the actual process hits the contracts office, PIRs per FTE in the
Mhm.
contracts office or something like that. That
Right.
seems to me about as close as you're going to get to where you actually see the mechanism gears start to turn and where
Yeah.
it might get choked up.
Yep. Yeah. To kind of say, hey, here's probably a metrics of both of those, right? Like here's what we've said we're going to do,
Yep.
and then
Mhm.
here's where we start seeing it actually come into play. Like
Yep.
here's where it's actually um,
Mm-hmm.
it's actually starting.
Yep.
And then you can say, okay, here's where, we've got, out of those, 20, here's 5 of them that are in process. Okay, we're now trending to where we're gonna see them actually, if they've forecasted, that they're going to start these things, 5 in the first quarter, or in the first half of the year. Okay, great. Then you've kind of like, okay, you've kind of built your plan for that. But if they haven't, if they haven't started any of them for the first half of the year, you're like, okay, I've got all my staff ready, and we've got all this process, and great. But are they, then you have to reevaluate. Are they you're gonna get hit with 10 of them at the second half of the year, or are they just readjusting because you can't keep up with that? So, but if you get all 10 at the first quarter, or the first, you're like, holy crap,
Yeah,
so
that's a good point. We brought this up like in other process review meetings over the years. Lisa and Tom probably been involved when we're, like you get approved capital plan, particularly for like maintenance projects, you get like a couple millions of dollars of approved, but they, it takes them like 2 or 3 months to get a PM assigned. And there's so much inertia behind getting the project moving along that you just wasted all this time where you could have been processing it. And then it gets a big glut at the end, and you only get about half the projects done that you were hoping to.
And then they want to know why you didn't get it done. And then you're like, well, if, for the lack of a better word, if you didn't sit on your ass, and
You're not anticipating it. You said you're not getting in front of it quick enough to make it happen.
Right. If you didn't spend all your time on your planning phase, then yeah. So, but that's that's like at this point in time, if I'm looking at those, what we have, that's probably like the first one that I would see.
And this may be way far in the weeds, but when we look at, the historic of this, it's not going to be a direct linear correlation between, you have 10 versus 20, it should just be doubled. The time should be doubled, right? So looking at that too when we talk about benchmarks.
Well, I think it could be a mix, because we come back to like the weighted piece. I mean, it's probably like if you have 10 of that range versus, or if you have, I don't know if it's, does 10 of the 250 to 2 million equate to, one of a $10 million project? I don't know what that weighted average is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know what I just don't know. But I think that's just the evaluation of like, okay, what does it take to handle those?
Mm-hmm.
And what's the complexity between those? So,
well, that standardizes it a little bit too.
It seems like we could get, maybe this is too far in too, but how many projects on the past 5-year capital plans have flowed through the contract office?
Yeah.
I mean, priorities change, I get it, but that also is good information on both ends, I think, on contract side and unit side for sticking with the plan.
Do they create a capital project plan and only 60% of it actually gets,
I think that's
I don't
true.
say gets through?
Yeah, that's I think the number actually, something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know
it's very, very small what actually happens.
I don't know that there's a button you can press and get that report though. It's I've been wanting to see it just for our measure. Like for our own projects, we don't really have it. It's a tough thing because the project names change, the projects might wait a little bit. It's like Longview is just terrible.
It's a great metric though. I'd love to see. You think like someone
really,
like Paul Street or Mary Lynn would really.
You mean you're looking for how many actually happen?
Yeah.
I think we do track for Joanne and the trustees. There is a report that we create that says, this is how much we said we were going to expend. This is what we did expend.
So
where it gets a little wiggly is, trying to assign all of those.
Right, exactly.
Projects
the total numbers you could get,
to the project that was listed in the capital plan, but Jim Gibbs assists with that. So there is a report provided, but I'm not sure it's going to have everything you want.
So
The
that
other
might
tricky
be,
thing with that is you guys have them too, portfolio projects. Like Jim's project's going to show up as one project in the capital plan, but it's
Mhm.
really 100 small projects. So
right.
that's a lot more work than it looks like in the capital plan for contracts. And our bundled projects are like 10, 12 projects of faculty renewals, and it's
And
all
you
one
could have some
line.
things that don't even get a par.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a hard comparison to make. But dollar wise, we know, I don't know if there's a way to convert that. But yeah.
As challenging as Longview has been, I'm sure that there's far more in it than we've taken advantage of.
Yeah.
So,
Deep inside there's something good.
so I, again, I'm not proficient in Longview, and I will never ever pretend to be. But there has to be many reports, given all of the data fields
Yeah.
that you fill out, right?
Yeah.
Um, all right. So, and I really appreciate this conversation, because I think as we get down into these, again, we're asking questions, and I know Jason and Mark are making many, many notes as to where can the data be found. And I think that we're on a really good track with this in particular. And I know some of the others have it. And when we talk about efficiencies, and what really came from this conversation on a really high level is, how can we be more dynamic? Because everything has a season. It, we shut down at a certain point in the university, so everything has a season. How can we be more dynamic and pull, cross train, and get out of our silos and that kind of stuff? And so that, on a big geeky level, I'll let Rick know that that's kind of where I see this going.
Be interesting if we could get staff from the colleges to come and help do
Couldn't
like
hear
a
you.
double educational thing.
Mm-hmm.
They've done that before. They had rotations. Like
Right.
they used to have like one extra person a year going through
Right,
contract.
but I don't know if they came from the colleges.
No,
I
that
was
would be
trying to
great. That
make
would
it
be awesome.
even a little bit wider.
Yeah, that would be
And
great. I think that'd be really good.
that's part of the functional review, and that absolutely measuring integration, right? So, right away, that it seems like a really, really good idea. I'll make note of that.
I could run, folks. So I'll see you later.
We have to go.
I have an interview. I have to go also. I'm sorry,
Yeah, me
Bridget.
too.
No, this is perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You guys, yeah, good stuff.
Thank you.
Take
Bye,
care.
guys.
Alrighty. So same format for tomorrow morning. And is there anything that you want to change about how we tackle, or how you tackled it, which is very nice? How you tackled it?
I don't think so, unless you guys, but looking for feedback. But I spoke with, well, we've talked to Elisa, but Dave and Daryl yesterday, just a half an hour. Hey, how are you doing? This can be kind of tough to be taking they're taking a few blows here and there
Right.
to the chin, but they both said, look, we're just going to listen and learn from all of this. And so I'm hoping that these conversations help, because I started to feel, here I go with feeling, that there was more collaboration and less defensiveness as we started having the conversation.
Yeah.
It was more, I felt this was productive. And what I'm hoping that you can get, Jason, is this is the data points from these conversations that we could look for.
Right. Yeah, and they had some of these, and what I'm going to try to do is, I mean, they've already listed some of those, so I've got to take some of these, and I got to, they talk about this, I can't remember if it's the CPP process or the CA process, but I got to just talk to Donna and say, okay, let's walk through that process, and tell me all the phases that you have and what can we start capturing, and just can you give me a sheet, and we just walk through that and say, what is the points that you guys want to capture. So,
I have to go because
Yep.
I have that EOQ thing. I can't be late because
Yep.
they notice when I'm not there. I'll
Okay.
see you later.
So, all right.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
See you
Bye.
tomorrow.